Put it in your stomach. It just gets cold and tight.
When the text hits your phone, your kid's school is in code red lockdown again.
Multiple lockdowns.
A code red lockdown.
2 middle schools are on code red lockdown.
Most are hoaxes.
So much goes through your mind. It's like, okay, Lord, please just keep my child safe.
Some are not.
I said to him, I said, what is that? Then he said, a gun.
These threats have shut down our schools and normalized security measures once reserved for prisons.
That AI algorithm is trained on thousands and thousands of different items, different weapons, different guns.
Tonight, we analyze the struggle to secure our schools and the price of being protective. This is On the Record. I'm Dan Haggerty. Welcome to On the Record. So, where do we start? Our country's problems involving guns aren't improving, certainly not when you look at schools. The past few weeks in the Triangle alone have been hard to fathom. Guns found at multiple schools. Students shot just off campus. A teenager died. Countless numbers of lockdowns and threats. And I say countless for a specific reason. It's not some lazy summary. I say countless because Wake County schools, for instance, they don't keep track. Though I will say, if you've been watching our coverage over the past few weeks, you certainly get the gist. Hillside High School in Durham was the worst of it.
We have reports of shots fired on the American Tobacco Trail in Durham.
Currently, Hillside High School is on lockdown.
Parents lined up waiting.
Just off campus, 2 students during the school day were shot. One was killed.
Hearing that a child or someone got shot, it's heartbreaking.
The student who passed away was a senior here and a great kid.
It's very somber. It's very quiet. It's loud, but it's quiet. It's just everyone's kind of in low spirits.
WRAL then learned that 2 days prior, the school discovered an unloaded gun inside a student's backpack, raising more questions about security.
Even though it was off campus, I'm not so sure that weapon wasn't on campus throughout the day. And that's concerning.
And all of it followed a string of lockdowns in Wake County.
This is any parent's worst nightmare that can possibly get that call.
Threats of violence at a half dozen schools in one day that forced parents to rush down, pick up their kids, and question if our schools have a handle on all this.
I'm exasperated. I really am. I mean, what are our administrators doing? What are our school board members doing?
They do as much as they can. Because otherwise, if they did it like how people would want them to, school would feel like jail. School already feels like jail sometimes.
We begin with breaking news. 2 guns found on 2 separate school campuses today. Still, after all of that, just days ago, 2 kids at 2 separate schools brought guns inside. One in Wendell, the other in Rocky Mount, where a 6-year-old had an unloaded 9mm handgun in his backpack at elementary school. Then, the next day in Johnston County at Cleveland High School, a resource officer found a gun, ammo, and knife in a student's car.
I don't know the solution, but what we've been doing, what we're doing now is not working. Things are getting worse, not better.
Another scare happened back in December. This was Fuquay Varina. A 12-year-old there brought a gun to school, fired a bullet through the classroom window before a teacher came and took that gun away. WRAL's Matt Tallhelm interviewed a young girl who witnessed it all in a memorable and saddening interview.
She said, "Why the hell do you have a gun at school?" She said that to the kid. I was panicking because I dropped my stuff at my seat and then I ran to the corner because I was scared. And the fact that it was a kid in school, that was like, my life just flashed before my eyes.
That same month, schools across the state got bombarded with dozens of threats and reports of an active shooter, all of them. In Fayetteville, someone called 911 saying that students had brought a gun and shot a gun at Jack Britt High School. Now, the reports were fake, but you know what? Can we stop for a minute, come back to me for just a second? Are you still with me here? Am I losing you at all? I mean, that's not an accusation. I get it. These stories do start to blend together a bit, don't they? I mean, no matter where you're watching this from, anywhere around the country, just in the past 2 weeks in Vermont, Michigan, Southern California, all of them lockdowns at dozens of schools. So if this report does start to sound redundant, well, you're right. But that's the point. These hoax calls do a lot of damage. They lock down schools, they panic parents, they rally the news media, they force police to halt classes and search for guns and bombs. Now, if that seems like an overreaction to some of you, consider calls like one that threatened schools in Massachusetts just this week. On Tuesday, police said the male caller states that he is armed with an AR-15 and pipe bombs in a backpack. The call ends with the sound of gunfire. I'm joined now by Tamika Kelly. She's the president of the North Carolina Association of Educators. And Tamika, thanks for joining us. Parents, I think, are well aware of the impacts that these threats and lockdowns have on their kids and their families. But when we take a broader view and step back, how do these disruptions hurt entire districts in a time where, frankly, we need to catch up? It has been a struggle to get our kids caught up after COVID. How do these lockdowns affect those efforts?
Well, first, thanks for having me on today. And I will say that as lockdowns have increasingly become necessary, they are an unfortunate disruption to the school day and throughout an entire school district. We know that it not only interrupts processes and requires resources to address what happens during the lockdown, but it also disrupts the safe environment that school officials and educators work hard to maintain for all of our students and staff.
How are teachers expressing their frustration to you when it comes to that? And I'm also curious, how has their impression of these threats and scares changed over time? Is the fear mounting? Are they becoming more stressed by all of this? Or are these hoax calls starting to sound a bit like the boy who cried wolf, which I think is kind of scary in its own right?
Well, I will say not only just for educators, but for students as well, we're all experiencing fear fatigue because we have to take each and every single one of these incidences seriously. And so we don't have the luxury or option to think of them as hoaxes or anything of that nature. And so one of the things that we continue to see is that our students and our educators are deeply affected when there are threats to their safety throughout the school day. And it makes us concerned about what can we do and what processes need to be put in place so one that we don't have a continued rise of these incidences during the school day, but also how can we help our community be active partners in making sure that our schools continue to be safe places for everyone.
How do we do that? You know, what do we need to put in place to change things? You know, there have been huge discussions around solutions, from big picture things like legislation around stricter gun control to what we do going in and out of our classrooms and fortifying our schools. What do you think our classrooms will look like in the next decade or so when my kids are juniors and seniors in high school?
Well, one of the things that's really important is that our schools continue to be welcoming and safe places for all, but we do have to have conversations about safety and security. And so one of the things that's really important to know is that when we talk about safety, we need to make sure that students can come to a safe school adult if they have issues instead of reacting to something and bringing a weapon on campus. And that's why our organization, NCAE, continues to advocate for mental health professionals in our school buildings, such as the increase of school counselors and school social workers. But we also have to have the conversation about security. And so what are the processes that we need to have in place for schools to be able to screen to make sure that weapons are not on campus? How do we have those conversations with existing SROs that are in schools to make sure that our schools continue to be welcoming so that we don't have a hardening of schools, because that is one place in our community that everyone is welcome.
Tamika Kelly with the NCAE, thank you so much for taking some time and being with us today.
Thank you.
Now, she mentioned the push for more mental health specialists in schools, and districts across the state have been trying to do more and investing more money in their people, but there's also been a push to invest in machines. When we come back, the new technology already being used in some of our schools, tech that used to be reserved for science fiction movies. That's next on The Record.
every day she leaves, I'm worried that she may not come back.
Helplessness.
So many things are going through your mind, and can you get there any quicker? You know, can I get there any quicker to be at my son's side?
I'm not sure. Like, I'm really not sure about sending her back to school.
I received the pictures of the lockdown classroom with her saying, "Mom, help me." And I said, "I'm coming right now." And she said, "How do I get out of here?"
There isn't a parent, I don't think, who can relate in some way to those feelings, that fear of the worst case scenario that's written all over that parent's face. At the beginning of this school year, Pew Research, they polled K through 12 parents, and they found that 19% were extremely worried about a shooting happening at their kid's school. Another 13% were very worried. Nearly 3/4 of the people asked were at least somewhat concerned. Now, keep in mind, if you're my age, let's say you're a young-ish parent, you know, these are questions that our parents never even considered. It just wasn't part of life. We've had to figure this one out on our own, and it has been taxing. Over the summer, the American Psychological Association published Stress of Mass Shootings Causing Cascade of Collective Traumas. It found out basically that we are more stressed than ever, and that stress has started to dull our compassion, which is scary to think about. Also understandable, I think, and very interesting, considering our schools have never been safer, or should I say they've never been more fortified in the name of safety. Most schools in our area use everything you see on the list right there, or a combination of most of the security measures on this list. They have school resource officers, those SROs. Those are people who are armed, on duty every day in the schools and can legally search a student's bag, or a student's locker. They have controlled access to the building. You can't just come and go. There are visitor check-ins, security cameras, two-way radios for staff, social media monitoring, an anonymous reporting system, and so on and so on. You may remember this summer after Uvalde, when a North Carolina sheriff in Madison County decided to stock every school with an AR-15. When asked why, he said this.
We've sometimes seen that having just a deputy armed with a handgun isn't enough to stop these animals. To those who might be looking to terrorize or harm our Madison County kids, don't bring that foolishness to Madison County, because it won't end well.
Sounds like a threat. It is a threat, obviously. Fight fire with fire is his approach. Now, other districts aren't going as old school, but they're after the same outcome: to deter a gunman from bringing that foolishness, as the sheriff put it. With many districts now investing millions of dollars on weapons detection technology to scan every student, teacher, and visitor who walks through the doors.
We're going to be able to have a high level of safety and security, but also not slow down and bog down our everyday routines.
Our Cullen Browder talked to school officials in Johnston County, where they just paid $6 million for this type of tech, a company called Evolve. Now, these aren't metal detectors. They look like that, but they're much more sophisticated. They use AI to interpret ultra-low frequency electromagnetic fields. Here's how the company's co-founder explains it.
If I come through the system and the system alerts and I might have a weapon on my right hip, the operator sees a little light, and then they see a picture of me and a red box on my right hip, so it knows it's that individual and that location that I need to ensure there is no weapon.
Now, Evolve's been around for a little while. They've been new to a lot of people, but they've been in event spaces for some time, like sports arenas and concerts and theme parks, that sort of thing. If you've ever been to Charlotte to a Panthers game, you have been scanned for weapons by Evolve. And that helped them secure a contract with Charlotte-Mecklenburg School System, where it's been celebrated as a success. Now, you might notice in some of this video, the kids are removing some items from their bags. They're holding them up. Tablets and laptops can get pinged from time to time, so it's not perfect. But the numbers are encouraging. Last year, 30 guns were found without the scanners. So far this year, with those scanners in place, only 3 guns were found, appearing to deter people from bringing guns to school. Now, I talked to Cullen this week about his reporting. Cullen, thanks, first of all, for chatting here. A couple of questions about the reporting. It was so fascinating to me. What happened happens when someone gets flagged, whether they have a weapon on them or not? If a kid is going into school and this software flags them, what's the next step?
So, for instance, in Johnston County, they have an SRO in every single school now, and they're going to train staff. So they'll all be there greeting children, visitors. If someone lights up, so to speak, and they want to know whether there's a weapon, move that person over to the side, and if it becomes a search, then that would happen.
So they can search the bag, the person, anything they need.
And it would show you where. So, I mean, if it's in a backpack, that's what they're going to search.
Got it. You mentioned some statistics during the reporting out of Charlotte, Mecklenburg. Now, they've had this for about a year now. The year prior, they found 30 guns on campuses throughout the district. So far this year, they've only found 3. Now, the 3 that they found this year, that was as kids were entering?
Right. So that was because of the technology.
And the 30 the year prior were found at all different times during the day?
Correct. In many different ways, so not the technology.
So of the 3 this year that were detected, none were found past the front door?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. To our understanding, yes.
Something I'm interested in, I'm sure the viewers are too, you're a respected journalist in this community. You've been at WRAL since before Columbine. You've seen a lot of things change since then. You're a father, your wife is an educator. Personally, what's going through your mind as you report today compared to what you have seen throughout your career reporting on schools and safety and these sorts of things?
It is incredibly sad where we are right now. Never, ever imagined we'd be talking about putting this kind of technology in schools that we'd be walking through, that would be needed. I mean, whoever thought that? I mean, my kids went through the Wake County Public Schools. Like you said, my wife's a college professor, but she's concerned about security on a daily basis. So it's where we are right now. And as a dad, you know, I want my kids, I want school children, I want their friends as safe as possible. So in terms of, if you're going to ask me personally how I feel, I'm okay with this kind of intrusion. You know, clearly as we ramp it up, then it's a legitimate question how far we go.
Colin, thank you. Now, there is another type of deterrent that we haven't discussed yet. Punishment. Punishment for gun owners who don't secure their weapons, the kids who bring those guns to schools, and the pranksters, if you want to call them that, making hollow threats that disrupt the school day and terrify people. We'll explain why most of the time it's little more than a slap on the wrist. When On the Record continues. Welcome back to On the Record. I'm Dan Haggerty. So we have seen the chaos when someone threatens violence at a school. Parents, they leave work. They rush down to the campus. They huddle nervously outside. Officers and flashing lights, they surround the building, running urgently into position. This here is at Zebulon Middle School earlier this month when a text to 911 triggered this radio call to officers.
Report of an active shooter at Zebulon Middle School. Report of shots heard upstairs, 6th grade hallway. Multiple shots heard.
The report was a hoax. There were no shots fired that day, but it followed these social media posts you see here showing weapons, a map of the school, and a racist rant threatening an attack. None of it was real.
We have got to get to a point where people are held accountable for their actions, and even young folks need to understand how serious this kind of thing is.
But keep in mind, the students who make these threats almost never spend time in juvenile detention. That's just not how our system is set up. We know kids make mistakes, so they get a lot more leeway than adults. That's why they have their own juvenile justice system. Here's how the Wake County DA explains it.
And so a lot of times what we are trying to do is use these charges, use the hammer of the criminal justice system to start the process of making sure that these individuals are getting the support, the treatment that they need in order to long-term mitigate that threat.
That said, sometimes the threats do come from grown-ups. Connor Terrell, 23 years old, he pleaded guilty to communicating threats, a felony, after threatening a Wake County school in a Snapchat video. He spent 66 days in jail, got some probation, and has to check in with the SBI. But still, lots of people think the punishments are all too lenient. Even the DA wants to be able to lock up kids who make serious threats while they wait to see a judge. But that would take a change to state law.
What are lawmakers doing about school safety, as that is a concern for parents?
So I'm sure we'll have legislation moving on some of the safety issues. And
WRAL has been pressing state lawmakers about school safety legislation, where last year they did approve $74 million in grants. But many people are less interested in what we do with money and schools and more interested in what we do with guns.
We have a real problem with unsecured guns in North Carolina. It's a dangerous tool when it gets in the wrong hand. What is it going to take for people to do the right thing? Right? Is it an incentive, or is it, a violation of the law and making it a felony?
Anti-gun violence advocates have taken aim, so to speak, at gun storage. North Carolina doesn't have a law that requires you to store your gun in a certain way. However, you can be charged with a misdemeanor if a kid who lives with you gets the gun and commits a crime, like, say, brings it to a middle school in Fuquay Varina, takes it out in class and fires it through a window. When that happened in December, the owner of the gun was charged with a Class 1 misdemeanor. Same with the two cases this week in Wendell and Rocky Mount. Both parents were charged. Now, if you're wondering, a Class 1 misdemeanor, it carries a maximum of 120 days in jail, though it is rare for someone to get the max penalty. It's kind of in the same category as stealing or breaking and entering, and that's likely where that crime will stay. In fact, earlier this week, lawmakers worked in the opposite direction and fast-tracked bills to make it easier for people to buy guns in our state. They want to remove local background checks, meaning private sales in North Carolina would have no background check at all. Now, to be fair, there's also a bill to incentivize safe storage, but it's likely to be lumped into that prior bill as a carrot for Democrats, kind of an all-or-nothing sort of thing. We'll keep an eye on what happens. But before we go tonight, I want to hear your thoughts. You may have noticed that tonight's On the Record resembles a segment I do called In Depth with Dan Haggerty. It airs during our 7 o'clock newscast. I use your questions, your opinions, and your feedback to drive the conversation forward. So email me at dan@WRAL.com or find me on social media. Just search Dan Haggerty. I'm the one who's not Grizzly Adams. Tell me what's in your mind, and we'll go in depth. Now, I am really curious on your thoughts for this conversation because the problem is not going away. In fact, on Friday, we had already written most of this show. East Garner Middle School went into code red lockdown after a threat on social media. They weren't alone. Southern Nash County Middle School went into lockdown too after a threat there. And someone found a gun at Irwin Elementary School in Harnett County. Thanks for joining us for On the Record. Be safe and have a good night.